Hi guys, this is Professor Fernandez. I hope you had a fantastic spring break. I hope you're ready to gear up for your research projects and more discussions on Dr. King and his work. This week we are talking about his Nobel Prize acceptance speech, which people don't really talk a lot about. There's a lot working here. It's definitely one of his shorter speeches. And this actually kind of kicks off a sequence of 3 speeches. So we have Dr. King, we have President Barack Obama's Nobel speech, and then we have Rigoberta Menchu's Nobel speech as well. And so all of their speeches talk about the bigger aspects of social justice and social issues going on in the world, where Dr. King and President Obama talks about about what's going on in the US. We also have Rigoberta Menchu talk about what's going on with the indigenous population in Guatemala. It's a country south of Mexico, guys. Look it up. Okay, so I want to talk about this Nobel Speech Prize acceptance speech, but I also want to kind of put it in perspective here. I think the intro to this in the book does a really good job of kind of putting us where we need to be to understand the context of this. So we're going to go through the rhetorical situation for this, but it's going to go out of sequence. What we need to know, or what we need to do when we look at any work that we're looking at, whether you're doing an analysis for the work for your research projects or work for the class, is that, of course, we need to read it. We need to analyze it, of which, you know me, my analyzation skills are amazeballs. But we also need to understand kind of where it's coming from. Here's the difference between doing a literary analysis versus a rhetorical analysis on a piece of work, where a literary analysis talks about how things are written, the effects that are happening on the page. It just stays on the page. The rhetorical analysis talks about the bigger issue, where it fits in the grander scheme of things, what is the argument that is being made, and what led to that argument. So we're going to look at this rhetorically. All right. So I'm going to start by doing a screen share here, if I may. Possibly. There it is. Okay, a screen share. And I'm going to go here to the King Center, or the King Institute for Education and Research here in, not here, but there at Stanford University. Now I've given you links to this website several times. This is actually a guiding website that we have used several times and will continue to use throughout the rest of the semester. So if you've not been on this particular website, you should probably get on the ball. Okay, so we know that this was written in 1964. I'm going to go up higher here to 63 to talk a little bit about what's going on. At this point, and this is context, right? Giving you some background. At this point, Dr. King is getting pretty well known here. He's been doing this work of nonviolent protests. Even back here, I can talk about, we could talk about his work with the Freedom Riders. You've already read his ideal of nonviolence and where that came from. One of you is actually doing some research on where he got the idea of his nonviolence work and how he incorporates that along with religion into his work. So we have it in 1963. It's a big year. Letter from Birmingham Jail, which we just read, was written. He was in jail for protesting in Birmingham. He was responding to 8 Jewish and Christian clergymen. And so this is important because audience is important when we're talking about Dr. King and the speeches or the letters or who he is addressing to, who is addressing things to, right? So he's always more than likely has an audience. It's very rare, and especially in this class when we're talking about his work, that he's not addressing someone. There is work that he has written, say in like a journal or a diary form, where he's not really addressing anyone. He's actually talking to someone. We're not going to get into those pieces here in this class, but I am definitely going to encourage you to look for those pieces. They are available here at the King Institute for Education and Research. So we have all this wonderful stuff happening in Birmingham. We have the March on Washington and the infamous I Have a Dream speech, of which he is well known for. They pushed that on wax, and it was given out, like not given out, people could purchase it, but it was it's the equivalent of it being on YouTube, right? It's the 60s equivalent of putting it up on YouTube. That they took the audio of this I Have a Dream speech, they put it on wax, or they put it in on records, and people could buy the speech and could hear it. So it had a bigger reach than just the March on Washington. So more and more people knew who he was, beyond just what was in the headlines. They got to hear him. They got to hear the cadence of his voice, his emphasis on words. Of course, Dr. King, as we well know, is a fantastic orator. So this is amazing, right? We also have here in 63, it's not on this particular timeline. Again, this is on the King Institute's website. There's a great timeline also in your book, but since I'm doing this, I wanted to have it up where you can see it. We also have the death here of a sitting president. President Kennedy was assassinated during this time in 63, 63 somewhere. Yes, in November of 63, if I remember correctly, memory serves. And so this is a time of turmoil. In addition to the death of a sitting president, of which we have collectively never had that experience, the death or the assassination of a sitting president, that is a humongous deal. So you could just imagine what it was like, right? Or we can only imagine what that was like. And in addition to that, we have the funeral and the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, where 4 little girls were killed in that bombing. And it was done by a member of the Klan, right? So we have all this happening. While all this is happening, huge deals, and we're only in 63, right? We haven't even moved to 64 where this piece is actually given. But in 63, we also have, dun, 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 the wiretaps. If you've not heard of the wiretaps, there's lots of literature on that, but Dr. King's phone was wiretapped, and Bobby Kennedy, the U.S. Attorney General at the time, authorized the FBI to wiretap King's phone. So we have a couple things happening in 63. It starts off with something really cool, the birth of his 4th child, and it ends with the assassination of a sitting president and his phone being wiretapped. And the death of children as well. So it's a very active year. And during this active year in civil rights, Dr. King is at the helm of it. There's also Malcolm X and other civil rights leaders, but Dr. King is exalted up on high at this moment for many reasons. One of you is actually doing research on that as well. So I'm very excited to see what they come up with. So now we're in 64. And so we have essentially where 63 was a year of turmoil, a year of things happening, lots of things happening. 64 is pretty much a lot of bringing Dr. King up on high, essentially, getting people knowing him a lot more. The very first thing that happens, he's named Man of the Year by Time Magazine. And so I'm pretty sure that was very controversial at the time, as Man of the Year, or Woman of the Year, or Thing of the Year usually is. But it was very controversial. And so you have all these things coming up. A couple of things I want to point out in this particular year, that King meets Malcolm X, another civil rights leader who takes a different path towards civil rights for African Americans in the US. They meet in Washington, D.C. And this is an infamous meeting of the minds here, where King and Malcolm X are meeting and they're talking about things, but nothing is recorded. The conversation's not recorded. There are no notes. There are no minutes. It's just them two having a discussion. And they meet for only one time in both of their lives. And that's it. So Lord knows what happened. Lord knows what they were talking about. I wish I could be a fly on the wall for that. So we have, of course, Dr. King publishing a couple of books during this time, and of course, doing his work. He leaves Birmingham and goes to Mississippi to do some of this work, and works with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the SNCC. In case you haven't noticed, what starts and pushes the civil rights movement are students. Students just like you who do this work. And of course, King supports and furthers this cause. Then you have the face-off between King and J. Edgar Hoover, this bigger than life figure for the FBI. Again, remember, his phone was being tapped, so there was wiretaps on his phone. And so King criticizes J. Edgar Hoover. J. Edgar Hoover says, "You are a liar and the worst thing that happened to this country." And then he starts calling everybody who does anything dealing with civil rights, for the most part, communists, because that's how that goes. And so there is a meeting, there's a showdown between King and J. Edgar Hoover. And then shortly after that, 9 days after that, he receives the Nobel Peace Prize, of which he wins $54,000, and all of it goes to civil rights. So this is what's happening. This is essentially kind of a big push, right? You're in the thick of it, in the heat of the civil rights movement in the mid to late 60s. Things are happening there. This is where you start getting those visuals of dogs being let go and sicking on people. You have high pressured water hoses being used. This is where you have all these things. This is even before Bloody Sunday. And Bloody Sunday, if you've ever seen the movie Selma, that talks about Bloody Sunday. Bloody Sunday happens the March of that following year. So a couple of months after he gets this Nobel Peace Prize, guys, is when Bloody Sunday happens. If you've never seen Selma, I highly recommend watching Selma. Essentially, it's the march from Selma on the bridge to and from Selma. And what makes it Bloody Sunday is that people were beaten and blood ran. So you should probably watch that movie. And so what I'm trying to bring home here is where we are historically with this piece is that he is at the apex of his popularity and his strength and his work in civil rights for African Americans here. So when we look at this particular piece, when we're looking at this speech, this is where we need to come from. And it's different than us going to Letter from Birmingham Jail. It's different from the first piece that we read, where he's at the beginning of his work. He is at the height, right? He is at the zenith. He doesn't quite know he's at the zenith, but he's at the zenith here. And so how he comes to this, he is coming to this topic that he's talking about in Oslo, Norway, with a lot of knowledge. So there is no theory here, right? He's not, well, I think this may work. It's more like, we did nonviolence. I think it's actually going to work. it's going to be violent for a minute, but it's going to work, right? So he is not talking about theory. He's not talking about, he's coming to this with knowledge and experience. So when you read this, this is a seasoned, tried and proven civil rights activist doing his work. So let's get started here. I'm really excited to talk about this a little bit. I hadn't read this until I was plotting and charting out this class. And when I read it, I'm like, this would be interesting to look at, and to look at President Obama's and Rigoberto Menchú, who also did this work for equality. So it's interesting to look at all three. So I'm going to do another screen share here. And I'm going to use the version that is on the King Institute website, which may be slightly different. I don't know why it would be, but in case I don't get everything, it may be slightly different. All right. One thing I do like about the King Center, or the King Institute, I should say, whenever they talk about a piece or have a piece that they have that comes up on the center, they have pretty much almost everything. I don't know if they don't have something. I think they have pretty much everything he's ever written, including like love letters to Coretta Scott King. Like they have it, they got it all. So I think what I really like about this is that they have, of course, the date. If there's this exact date, they give you an exact date, or they give you kind of an estimate of when it was said or written. They give you location, but they also give you topics here, which is very important when we're doing the rhetorical situation. So we have like a head start when it comes to topic. We know he's talking about Birmingham in '63. We know he's talking about churches and vandalism. He's talking about political views, nonviolence, and voter registration in this piece. So he's talking about all this. We're of course going to probably add more topics to this as well. But this gives us a head start on that part of the rhetorical situation. In addition, topic, of course, helps us do research and helps us go into the databases just a little bit better and a little bit easier. So let's get started here. All right, looking at my trusty and handy notes that I have made here, we're going to start here with audience here. As we know, audience is a step of the rhetorical situation, but it's also a step of the 8 elements of argument. So we're just going to hit audience and get done with like 2 steps, 2 birds, 1 stone, all right? So we already know that the audience here is the people who are there listening to him accept the Nobel Peace Prize. So when the Nobel Peace Prize is given by, of course, the organization that does that, but it is given each year in Oslo, Norway. So people have to travel to Oslo to get this prize. And you can get the Peace Prize in several different categories. He, of course, got it in the category of peace or something. I will look that up. I apologize for that. You can get it in chemistry. You can get it in whatever. Anything that deals, you can get it for essentially anything that helps make the world a better place. So obviously he got it for his work in civil rights in the United States. Anyone can get it. So his audience here is the King, His Majesty of Norway, the Royal Highness, the president of the organization that gives the Nobel Prize, and anybody else. So he is really addressing dignitaries. And so his intended audience are the dignitaries who are there that night to hear him accept the prize. Of course, this goes worldwide, right? And so his unintended audience is the world. So this is quite different from different things, right? Different from Letter from Birmingham Jail, where his intended audience were, the clergy, and his unintended audience were everybody else who read the Atlantic Monthly version of the letter. And then, of course, anybody who studies it, King scholars, us as well. But this is slightly different. So he's addressing dignitaries. So he is going to do things a little bit differently. where he addresses the clergy and letter from Birmingham jail, and you have a lot of examples of kind of higher thought and higher thinking. You have philosophers, and you have scripture, and you have all these things that you probably, or they would probably know from divinity schools. You don't have that here, right? So he is probably what led to it being a shorter speech than what he usually gives, and a little bit more concise speech. So there you go. Okay, so we have that, and then we have this situation happening here that I find kind of fascinating, this diction that he has here in this first paragraph, or second paragraph, I should say. Let me look for it. It's up high. It's in the second paragraph for me here. I accept the Nobel Peace Prize. Here goes. The creative battle to end the long night of racial justice. All right, so this is kind of the first glimpse of what we get, him making kind of an extended metaphor throughout this entire piece. He is talking about kind of injustice, racial injustice, this turbulent time in America right now. Again, we have the death of an assassination of a sitting president. We have, actually, let me look, make sure that I have my dates right on that. Yeah. So President Kennedy was assassinated in November. He gets this in December or November of 63. So we have just had an assassination of a sitting president, the bombing of a church. You have his phones tapped, him being jailed another time. He was jailed, I think, about 3 times during his life. At least 3 times that I counted. There were probably more. You have all this turmoil, right? And he's calling this a night. And everything that comes after, right? There's, with night, there's always a morning. There's always something to look forward to. Night doesn't last forever. And so he is making this extended metaphor throughout this entire piece of this turbulent time in America, this turbulent time in civil rights, this turbulent time in social justice. Because again, what's also happening during this time is the Chicano movement is starting to grow legs as well. So you all not only have civil rights for African Americans and the Black diaspora in America, but you also have the Chicano civil rights movement, or the Chicano movement, happening at the same time. And you also start getting like glimpses and like snaps of the feminist movement happening as well. So it's very, very turbulent. Lots of things are happening here, constantly. And this is the night, right? Because everyone is fighting for justice for themselves, for their demographic. They're fighting for being seen and being able to live a life, and that it's night. But night doesn't last forever. There is a dawn happening. So he talks about this, and this is the first glimpse we have on this extended metaphor. I also find the words creative battle quite interesting as well, because he says this twice. He calls it creative battle at first, and at the end, he calls it creative turmoil, right? Trying to creatively end this battle, creatively end the turmoil. And so it's almost like he's calling the nonviolence movement creative, right? People think, and I'm just spitballing on the top of my head, people think that you fight violence with violence, but he's trying to fight violence with love. And he says this here later on when we get to it. I'm jumping ahead, so let's continue on. He gives us a lot of background here. You also have to understand big thing that happened in Philadelphia, Mississippi, where people were brutalized and people were beaten for trying to get their right to vote. And that had just happened before this speech. So he included it in this speech. Let me see where I can find that. Let's see. Yes, I am mindful that only yesterday in Birmingham, Alabama, our children were crying out for brotherhood, were answered with fire hoses, snarling dogs, and even death. I am mindful that only yesterday in Philadelphia, Mississippi, young people seeking to secure the right to vote were brutalized and murdered. I am mindful that debilitating and grinding poverty afflicts my people and chains them to the lowest rung of the economic ladder. So we have a couple of things happening here. We have evidence, right? This is evidence of his work. So that's one, this is a element of argument that he's dealing with here, but he's also doing some repetition stuff here. I am mindful, I am mindful, I am mindful. So he's being humble here. Like, this is a big deal, guys. Winning a Nobel Peace Prize is a mega huge deal. And he understands that that winning this doesn't mean that his work is done, right? So he's being very humble about this, that like, I still have work to do. Thank you very much for this, but like, people need me. I'm here for this work. And this is the work that I am doing. Let's talk about that last line, the debilitating and grinding poverty afflicts my people. He has done lots of work with poverty. And I'm trying to remember if I've assigned that essay. I don't think I have, and maybe the drum major instinct. I don't remember which essay it was where he talks about poverty. It may be the first thing that I assigned. I don't remember. I've read a lot of essays. And his idea of poverty being one of the shackles that chains African Americans to injustice. Watch out for this in his work. As you guys do your research, if your research is king heavy, this is something you may want to watch out for. Okay, so he talks about being mindful. He talks about that, and he's also being persuasive here. Right here, where he says, "Therefore, I must ask why this prize is awarded to a movement which is beleaguered and committed to unrelenting struggle, and to a movement which has not yet won every peace and brotherhood, which is the essence of the Nobel Prize." So that's the beginning of persuasion. Now, remember, persuasion is that you're relenting a piece of the argument so that you can come back and make a bigger argument later. So he's like, yeah, I have to ask, like, well, we're not done with the work that we're doing here. Why would we get this? Like, we have so much work to do. We're not quite there yet. We're not at the dawn of a new civilization, what he calls it later on in this piece. And then you have the relenting part of the persuasion. After contemplation, I conclude that this award, which I receive on behalf of that movement, is a profound recognition that nonviolence is the answer to the crucial political and moral questions of our time. The need for man to overcome oppression and violence without resorting to violence and oppression. Right? So this argument, so you don't think he may be making an argument here as he's accepting this major global award, but he is. He's saying, our work isn't done. Why would you give this to me? And this may be a question at the time. Again, I'm not a historian, but this at the time may be a question that is being asked of other people, from other people. Why is Dr. King receiving this if his work is not done? If there is no equality among the races, no equality among the people who live in the United States, why his work isn't done, why receive this Nobel Prize? And so this is kind of the answer to that, that it's not so much that the movement isn't done or that we are done with our work, it's that we have shown that nonviolence is the answer to doing this work, that you don't answer oppression and violence with oppression and violence, which is amazing here. And this very much a political and moral question as well. So let's keep going here. So we have persuasion happening here, and there's lots of claims he makes here, but This is also that contemplation line here is also a claim, right? This is what he is claiming. Again, remember when I said he is making this speech as a seasoned veteran of the civil rights movement. There is no theory, right? Where before he was like, this is kind of what I'm thinking may work and can get us like to a better place. This is kind of what, I'm kind of learned. I'm bringing in these philosophers. I'm quoting Gandhi. I kind of like what he does and what he stands for. No, this is a seasoned vet saying, this is what we're doing. This is what's going to solve the problem. This right here, in addition to being persuasion, right? This paragraph entirely is the persuasion, but this part here, where it starts after contemplation, that is your claim. And he makes that claim and bolsters that claim throughout this entire piece. He also adds to this, let me see. This next part is amazing here. To achieve essentially a better civilization, right? Better civilization, right? Remember, he's making that extended metaphor about night, and we're at the dawn of a better civilization. To achieve this, man must evolve for all human conflict a method which rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation. The foundation of a method is love, right? So he kind of gives us a blueprint here. And I argue that most of his work gives us a blueprint of what the dawn of that new civilization that he is thinking about, where everyone achieves a type of equality that frees them and doesn't bind them. This is how you do it. You do it by love. You don't do it by violence and oppression. Everyone rejects violence and oppression. They reject revenge, they reject retaliation, and they do this from a place of love. This is a radical idea, guys, a super radical idea, because this takes everything that every politician has ever done, or not every politician, but lots of politicians have ever done, that questions their motive. Anybody who's a leader, anybody who is in charge of anyone or the well-being of anyone, questions their motives. And Dr. King here is asking them to just, let's rethink this. If you're not moving in love, you are not moving correctly, right? So it's very basic, it's very simple, but it's very radical and very revolutionary. This is also very Christian. This is also very, very like, what would Jesus do? He would move in love, right? So I know one of you guys is talking about kind of religion in how Dr. King is doing his work. This is probably another example where he's literally not saying, what would Jesus do? He's just saying, let's just move in love. And anyone who knows anything about any religion knows that this is something that he would be about. So very radical things, like and it's cool because he's radical, but he's not really saying anything that's like jarring. That's why Dr. King is the king. All right. Let's keep going. He's making these wonderful metaphors. He keeps going. And he talks about flight here. Every time I take flight, I'm always mindful of the many people who make a successful journey possible, the known pilots and the unknown crew. So I think that's kind of dope as well. And this is why it's dope. He makes this extended metaphor. Oh, that's not even in here. No, it's not even in here. Ooh, see how there's like different versions of things. It's not in here. I'm gonna have to ask them why that's not in here. Okay, so the part that I read is actually in your book, and it's right after that love thing, the such method is love. He goes after that, from the depth of my heart, I am aware that this prize is much more than an honor to me personally, right? And then he says, every time I take flight, I am always mindful of the many people who make a successful journey possible, and the known pilots and unknown ground crew. So he talks about flight. when he talks about the dawn of this new civilization, right? It's very airy, it's very light, it's very like hopeful. When he talks about current things this night, it's very heavy, it's very dark, it's very kind of like pressing on you. And I want you to take a note of that, because that adds to his metaphor and what he's talking about. This whole piece is hopeful. There's nothing that's not hopeful in this piece. And so knowing who his audience is, and who his intended audiences and then unintended audience, because people from home are gonna know what's going on too. This may be running in a newspaper or whatnot. What does this message of hope mean, right? What does this message of hope, what does he hope for this to become? If you've got a world stage and the whole world is listening to you, what do you say? And for Dr. King, it's hope. Hope is eternal. Like, things are dark, but we're going to work it out, right? So that's what's awesome about that. Okay, so the part about that's not here. So there's
on your calendar, meeting with Tiffany starts in 15 minutes.
There you go. There is my Alexa telling me I'm meeting with Tiffany soon. So
from your calendar, meeting with Tiffany.
So here's what's also not in this.
I don't have an answer for that.
Thank you. What's also in this here, and it's not here as I'm looking at this, is a really good example of pathos. On page 109, towards the end, it's the second to the last paragraph. He writes, most of these people will never make the headlines and their names will not appear in Who's Who. Yet the years have rolled past, and when the blazing light of truth is focused on this marvelous age in which we live, men and women will know and children will be taught that we have a finer land, a better people, a more noble civilization, because these humble children of God are willing to suffer for righteous sake. You have this, you're filled with hope, you're filled with happiness, you're filled with kind of like, yes, this is what we're going to do. That's his use of pathos here. Let's keep going. Okay. So now we're lined up here, the tortuous road which has led from Montgomery. Okay. We have some repetition happening here. I refuse to, I accept, I believe. These are like very bold, logical statements here. It's almost like he's using logos. In fact, you are using logos. So let me explain logos a little bit, because logos, of course, is logic being used to make the argument. You can also have a logical statement. A logical statement is something like 2 + 2 = 4. If this, then that, right? If I go to the store, then it will rain. That's a logical statement. It makes no sense because it may not work, but that's a logical statement. And so he almost has those structures happening here. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. That is why right temporarily defeated is stronger than evil triumphant. I believe that even amid today's mortar bursts and whining bullets, there is still hope for a brighter tomorrow. I believe that wounded justice. So he's making logical statements, but he's also making very, very declarative statements here. I refuse this, I refuse this, I refuse this. I believe this, I believe this, I believe this. And he's saying these very succinctly. And even here, as you can see it, and it's not so much well, it actually is in your book here, how it's structured here. You can't see it, but you'll see it here. How it's even put together on the page. I refuse to accept, I refuse to accept, I refuse to accept. I believe that, I believe that, I believe that. I have the audacity to believe The peoples everywhere can have 3 meals a day for their bodies, education and culture for their minds, dignity, equality, and freedom for their spirits. So you even have all of this, right? This whole thing is also pathos, because this is like kind of rallying the troops here. And let me kind of explain how this is rallying the troops. You have these sentences, and whenever you have things in relatively short sentences here, but in short sentences and in succession, right, you create this rhythm. It's almost like a rhythm and a call to action. I refuse to accept the idea that the isness of man's present nature makes them morally incapable of reaching up for eternal oughtness that forever confronts them. I refuse to accept. So like it just riles it up. And you see this working also in Letter from Birmingham Joe when he's talking about taking his daughter to Funland, right? It's almost that part, it's almost like one continuous sentence that's separated by semicolons. And if you read it out loud, right, it's a train on a track, and it just keeps going faster and faster and faster. He is using rhythm here, and because he's using rhythm and that train is going faster, you have this pathos. You're like, yes, I refuse to accept it too, and I believe it too, right? He's fantastic at this, and this is a fantastic use of pathos here. All right. So let's talk about more topics here. This is an interesting piece, right? This is a piece that's not often talked about and often taught, but why I wanted to use this is that he is like at the height of his power as an orator and as a writer, as someone who gives speeches. He knows how to move a crowd. And looking at this versus Letter from Birmingham Jail, which granted, it's not a speech, but it was written as well, or his first speech the first speech that we read, it's a whole different Dr. King, right? Where before he's testing stuff out, now he's at his height of his power. There's no testing. He knows exactly what he's doing. He has the virtue of experience. And he uses it to great effect here. So we have here a couple of topics. Hope, for sure. This is a very hopeful piece. Again, he has the world's ear, he's on a world stage. He preaches hope and love. And our work is not done, and we shall overcome, right? All these positive things. He talks about the dawn of a new civilization, not a new world, not a new United States, not a new Birmingham, but a new civilization. He's including everyone in that, everybody. And we also have some religious overtones here, like a what would Jesus do moment with love, right? We have to start from love. And then the idea of dawn versus light. Again, he makes this metaphor throughout this entire piece. So those are your topics. I know I went through this fairly quickly. I may not have. I'm trying to keep it under an hour. I'm not quite sure if I've done this correctly. But I hope that this was helpful for you to break down this piece. It's a very interesting piece. What would you say if you won the Nobel Peace Prize for something that you did and your work is not done yet, but you had the whole world's attention? What would you say? I suspect that writing this was not an easy thing to do. I don't know what I would have written under his pressure, but love, peace, and brotherhood is what he's about. And so that's who he took to the ball here. If you have any questions, you know how to reach me. Happy reading and happy analyzation. Bye, guys.